Dongtang's movement opening the door was a step faster than my eyes opening. "Miss, the master asks for you in the front hall." Her voice still sounded as it did at 16, crisp and clear, untainted by the grit and blood rust of later years. I stared at the ceiling canopy above me. It had a blue-gray base with an interlocking lotus pattern. 5 years ago, I thought it too plain and had someone trace a border of gold thread around it. The gold thread was still there. I reached my hand out from under the quilt and touched the half-piece of a jade pendant by my pillow. It was cold, the green cord tied in a dead knot, just as I had placed it there before sleep last night. "What time is it?" "6:15 in the morning." I sat up. The very moment my feet touched the footstool, my fingertip brushed against the broken edge of the jade pendant. The fracture hadn't been polished, and a jagged burr pricked my skin. 3 days later, the embroidered uniform guards surrounded the manor. My father was thrown into prison, Shen Zhao died while being escorted, and Dongtang. I closed my eyes and took a breath. When I opened them again, Dongtang was already standing by the bed, holding my outer robe. "Dongtang." "Miss." I glanced at her. A person who is still alive has flesh on their cheeks and no rope mark around their neck. I had a dream last night. Dongtang's hand paused as she tied the sash of my robe. "Did you have a nightmare, miss?" "Not exactly." I lowered my head to let her fasten the frog buttons on my inner lapel. "I dreamed that people were coming to the house to move things out. They were in a great hurry, as if they were afraid they wouldn't make it in time." Dongtang's movements came to a complete halt. I felt her fingers stiffen at my collar. She paused for about 2 breaths before continuing to fasten the buttons. "Miss. Dreams are always the opposite of reality." "Is that so?" I walked over to the dressing table and sat down. In the bronze mirror, that face still bore the marks of sleep. There were no dark circles under the eyes, and there was color in the lips, all the things a 16-year-old should have. "Then bring me the ledger from the storehouse to look at today." Dongtang did not respond. Through the mirror, I saw her standing 3 paces away. Her lips moved slightly, but in the end, she only uttered a single yes. As I put on my shoes, I ran the numbers in my head. In the storehouse, the assets that could be liquidated included 4 crates of silk, 2 boxes of jewelry, and an authentic scroll of calligraphy and painting from the previous dynasty. There were also 3 land deeds in a hidden compartment in Father's study. There wasn't much ready cash, but if I converted it all into small gold nuggets and carried them out through the side gate trip by trip in food baskets, 3 days would be enough to clear it all out. Not a single word of this was spoken aloud. But I saw Dongtang's fingertips curl as she tightened her grip on her cuffs. "Miss," she whispered, "the way you've been speaking this morning. It's not quite like your usual self." "What's different?" She pursed her lips and thought for a moment. "I can't quite say, it's just. Every single word is clear." I didn't respond to that, but stood up and walked outside. The lanterns under the eaves were still lit, and the horizon was tinged with the pale blue-gray of a crab shell. The front hall was filled with a roomful of people. Shen Jingting sat in the primary seat sipping tea, while Lady Fong sat below him clicking through the abacus beads. Shen Zhao leaned back in his chair, flipping through something or other, and even Shen Yi had been called back from his studies, now sprawling across Lady Fong's knees and yawning. The moment I stepped through the door, everyone looked up at me. "Yaxin is here." Shen Jingting set down his teacup. "Lady Fong says the tally for the storehouse is missing. Have you seen it?" I hadn't even sat down yet. Chiwu stood behind Lady Fong, her eyes sweeping across my face before darting back to Lady Fong's hand. Lady Fong did not stop flicking the prayer beads, but her knuckles were strained tighter than before. "I didn't take the tally," I said, sitting down beside Shen Yi. "Father, I've already sent Dongtang to fetch the warehouse account books." "What are you doing fetching the account books?" Shen Jingting frowned. "That is a matter for the inner household. You, an unmarried girl, father. I interrupted him. The room suddenly fell silent and even Shen Zhao stopped flipping through his book. I had a dream last night. As soon as I said this, I saw Lady Fang's fingertips pause on the abacus. The bead remained unmoved. I dreamed that someone was carrying things out of the storehouse, so many things, but they were all smashed to pieces, I said. Father, that pine stream boating painting in our storehouse, is it an authentic masterpiece from the previous dynasty? Shen Jingting's brow furrowed even deeper. And what if it is? I want to see it. Nonsense. He slapped the table, the lid of the teacup rattling from the impact. It's first thing in the morning and instead of talking about serious matters, you're going on about some dream. Father. I called his name once more. My voice wasn't any louder this time, but Shen Jingting stopped mid-sentence. I looked at him, swallowing the words the Brocade Guard will be here in 3 days. Those words could not be spoken. To say them aloud would be considered spreading heresy and speculating on the Emperor's will. Shen Jingting would have me locked in the ancestral hall before I could finish. But I thought it. I looked into his eyes and clearly completed the sentence in my mind. The Brocade Guard will be here in 3 days, father, and that lofty integrity of yours won't be enough to save the Shen family. Shen Jingting's face suddenly turned pale. He gripped the edge of the table abruptly, his knuckles turning blue from the strain. He leaned back against the chair, his chest heaving 3 or 4 times before he managed to steady himself. Father? Shen Zhao finally closed his book and sat up straight. What's wrong? Shen Jingting ignored him. He stared straight at me, his eyes shifting once, then again, as if he were trying to confirm something. Yet Xin, he spoke, his voice slightly raspy. What did you just say? I said I wanted to take a look at the Pine Stream boating painting. Not that sentence. Shen Jingting's Adam's apple bobbed. He glanced at Lady Fang, then at Shen Zhao, before finally letting his gaze fall back onto my face, asking in a low, suppressed voice, "What exactly were you thinking just now?" Fang's internal calculations came to a complete grinding halt. Shen Zhao slammed his book onto the table with a loud thwack and dragged his chair forward half a foot. Sister, what were you thinking? Why does father look like that? Shinny lifted her head from my lap, rubbing her eyes as she mumbled, Big sister, your heart is beating so fast. I didn't reach up to cover my chest. I looked at Shen Jingting and said slowly, Father, let me keep the keys to the warehouse for 3 days. You. In 3 days, I looked at him, my voice neither high nor low, I will tell you why. Shen Jingting stared at me. His lips quivered slightly, and I saw the veins on his temples bulging, a sign of his suppressed rage, yet what lay beneath those eyes was not anger. It was fear. He stood up abruptly, his sleeve knocking over the teacup. The brown tea spilled across the table, dripping down the edge. Lady Fang stood up with a startled cry to wipe it away, Shen Zhao rose as well, and even Qiuwu took a step forward. Only I remained still. Shen Jingting walked over and stood before me, looking down at me for a long time. Yaxin, his voice was so low that only the two of us could hear, just now. Did you remember something just now? I neither said yes nor no. I pulled the half-piece of jade pendant from my sleeve and placed it on the table. The broken edge faced upward, its jagged burrs clearly visible in the morning light. Father, if the item is broken, another set can be made, I said. As long as the material is still there. Shen Jingting's hands were trembling. He looked at the jade pendant, then at me, before suddenly turning around and waving his hand dismissively at everyone, his back toward us. The keys, his voice was as raspy as sandpaper, have Qiuwu go get them. Give them to Yaxin. Madame Fang shot to her feet. Master, let her have it. Shen Jingting didn't look back. He stood by the window, his shoulders slumped, looking as if he had suddenly aged 5 years. Qiuwu glanced at Lady Fang. Lady Fong gritted her teeth and ultimately remained silent. Shen Zhao nudged closer to me and asked in a low voice, "Sister, what exactly did you say to father?" I stood up and tucked the jade pendant back into my sleeve. "I said it on the way to the front hall," I said. "You heard me." Shen Zhao's expression shifted for a moment. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, the corner of his eye twitching slightly. In the end, he only uttered 2 words. "I heard you." I turned and walked toward the door. "Yaxin," Shen Jingting called out to me from behind. I didn't look back. "In 3 days?" "MHM. Are you sure it's 3 days?" "I'm sure." He didn't ask any further. As I walked out of the front hall, Dongtang came running from the other end of the veranda clutching the account books, panting, her cheeks flushed from the exertion. "Miss," she said, handing over the books and lowering her voice, "Nanny Chiwu came to collect the warehouse tally just now. She said it was on the master's orders." "MHM." I took the account books and flipped to the first page, my eyes scanning down from the very first line. Dongtang leaned in closer, her voice as faint as a mosquito's hum. "Miss, when you were in the front hall just now, were you counting something in your head?" I turned a page. 3. Dongtang froze for a moment. I didn't look at her again and continued flipping through the pages. "You count 3, too." She suddenly fell silent. With my finger pressed against the footer of the ledger, I mentally reviewed the items that needed to be moved. The first trip would involve the calligraphy and paintings. They were lightweight and inconspicuous. I would pack them into scroll tubes, hide them at the bottom of food containers, and leave through the side gate under the pretext of delivering offerings to Xian Temple outside the city. All of this had to be completed within 3 days. Dongtang suddenly gathered the account books into her arms and grabbed my hand, pulling me a few steps toward the corner of the veranda. "Miss," her face turned pale, and her lips trembled slightly, "that 3 you just mentioned in your mind. What exactly were you referring to?" I came to a halt beneath the veranda. The morning light sliced down from the eaves, carving a sharp line between light and shadow across her face. I pulled the account books back from her embrace. "Go and get my food container. The large one." "Miss Dongtang." She fell silent. I flipped to the second page of the ledger, my gaze coming to rest on the calligraphy and painting column. "I'm going out today. Go tell the gatekeeper that I'm heading to Xian Temple to offer incense and present a painting to the Buddha." Dongtang's knuckles turned white as she gripped her sleeves. "Which one are we offering?" I tilted my chin slightly, gesturing toward the 5 characters on the ledger, boating on a piney stream. "This is the one." Dongtang bit her lower lip and remained silent. I closed the ledger and tucked it back into her arms. "What are you standing there for?" I said. "Go get the food box. The large one." She turned around and ran. Standing under the corridor, I pulled the broken half of the jade pendant from my sleeve to look at it once more. The jagged edges I had just rubbed were still there, unchanged. 3 days later, the embroidered uniform guards surrounded the manor. Today, I must get the painting out first. As for the rest, I will figure it out on the way. When Dongtang came running toward me around the screen wall, clutching the food box, I went over the plan in my mind once more. The second trip would be for the silks, the third for the jewelry sets, and the fourth for the land deeds hidden in the secret compartment of Father's study. The food box wouldn't be able to hold the deeds. I would have to find another way. Dongtang ran up to me, panting as she handed the box toward my hand. "Miss, I've brought it." I lifted the lid and took a look inside. It was empty, and the bottom was deep enough. It would be perfect once lined with a layer of oil paper. "Let's go." As I stepped out of the side gate, Dongtang followed behind me and asked in a low voice, "Miss, are we coming back after this trip?" I stepped onto the threshold at the entrance and looked back at her. "We're coming back," I said. "We have to make a second trip tomorrow." "Miss, we have arrived at Cin Temple." I lifted the carriage curtain. The carriage had stopped at the side gate. The stone steps before the entrance were swept to a shine, the morning dew had just dried, and the pilgrims had not yet arrived. A monk sweeping inside the mountain gate looked up at the sound of the carriage, then lowered his head and continued his work. Ding Tang came around from the back of the carriage holding a food box. I took the box and pressed my palm against the bottom. It was cold. The bottom of the box was lined with oil paper, and the scroll was wrapped in 2 layers of cloth, so it hadn't been dampened by the morning dew. "Wait here." "Are you going in alone, miss?" "Hmm." Hui Ming was waiting for me in the side hall. He was fingering his prayer beads and chanting sutras when I entered. He stopped upon seeing me, his gaze falling on the food container in my hand. "You have arrived, benefactor." "Master." I placed the container on the small table and lifted the lid, revealing the oil paper wrapping. "The painting I promised to offer a few days ago, boating on the Pine Stream, has been delivered today." Hui Ming didn't touch the food container, but glanced at me. "You don't look well, benefactor." "I didn't sleep well last night." Poor sleep is usually due to having something on one's mind. I snapped the lid of the food container back on. "I'll have to trouble you to keep this painting safe, master. Don't let anyone touch it. I'll come back for it in a few days." Hui Ming's hand, which was thumbing the prayer beads, paused for a moment. He didn't ask why, but simply pressed his palms together, chanted a Buddhist prayer, and said, "This humble monk has noted it." As I left the side hall, I glanced toward the eastern corridor, which led to the entrance of the backyard cellar. The old wooden door was left ajar, and a patch of dust along the edge of the threshold had been rubbed away. Someone had opened it very recently. I didn't stop my pace and walked toward the mountain gate. Hui Ming did not follow me out. On the carriage ride back, Dong Tang asked, "Miss, has the painting been offered?" "Hmm. Are we coming back tomorrow?" "Not tomorrow." I leaned against the carriage wall and closed my eyes. "Tomorrow, we need to move something else." Dong Tang didn't ask anything further. The wheels crushed the gravel on the official road outside the city. The carriage jolted for a moment before steadying again. But she was unusually quiet during the latter half of the journey. I opened my eyes to look at her. She was huddled by the carriage door with her shoulders hunched, her face flushed, and her lips so dry they had begun to peel. "Dong Tang." "It's nothing, miss," she said, lowering her hand from her forehead, her voice a bit muffled. "I left in a hurry this morning and didn't wear my lined jacket. The wind must have caught me." I reached out and touched her forehead. It was burning. "Don't mention this to anyone else when we get back to the manor. Go to the backyard, boil some hot water, and sleep it off to sweat out the fever." Dong Tang nodded, and before long, she leaned against the carriage wall and fell asleep. I heard her mumble 2 words in her dreams. They sounded like "miss," but also like "don't go." Everything in the manor was as usual. The servant at the side gate saw me return and said with a fawning smile, "You're back early today, miss." I didn't respond, walking through the backyard toward the storehouse. Dong Tang was walking slowly, so I told her to go back to her room and rest first, while I turned into the side room of the storehouse. Chiu Wu was standing at the entrance of the side room. She didn't go in, nor did she stop me. She just stood by the doorframe, her eyes moving from my face to the keys in my hand, and then from the keys back to my face. "Miss," she spoke slowly, "the madam told me to wait for you here." I pushed open the door and walked in. "Why are you waiting for me?" "The madam said that if you have returned, miss, she would like you to come to the main courtyard for a visit." "I understand." I turned around and glanced at her. "Nanny Chiu, please go back and tell the madam that I will be there as soon as I put my things down." Qiuwu did not move. Miss, she lowered her voice slightly, what was in the food box when you went out this morning? I inserted the key into the keyhole. With a click, the lock opened. A painting, I said. I took it to Shen Temple as an offering to the Buddha. Qiuwu's lips twitched. I didn't look back at her, but I knew what she was thinking, that boating on a pine stream painting had hung on the east wall of the storehouse for 6 years. Shen Jingting himself couldn't bear to touch it on ordinary days, yet I had taken it out to offer to the Buddha. Qiuwu stood by the door for a few breaths before finally turning to leave. I closed the side door behind me, but instead of rushing to open the storage room, I first walked a circle around the outer chamber. There were 3 rooms in the treasury. The outer chamber held large items, bulky goods like screens, tables, and chairs, while the truly valuable items were kept in the inner chamber and the hidden compartments. I held the tally, but Fang's key could open the lock to the outer chamber. I crouched down to examine the floor tiles in the corner of the outer chamber. The seam of the 3rd tile against the north wall was a hair wider than the others. I picked at it with my fingernail. The tile moved. Lifting the tile, I found a layer of oilcloth underneath, wrapping 3 pieces of paper. I pulled them out and unfolded them, the 3 land deeds from the hidden compartment in my father's study. Fang thought she had copied them and hidden them away, but when she made those copies, the original deeds were no longer where she thought they were. I tucked it back into my sleeve and replaced the brick. Then, I unlocked the inner room. 4 chests of silk, 2 boxes of head ornaments and 1 chest of miscellaneous items, jade bracelets, jade pendants, a silver wine pot, and 2 folding fans with ivory handles. Everything was clearly listed in the ledger, but the ledger only showed the numbers. It couldn't tell which piece was which. I stood before the pile of goods and went over them twice. The silk was the easiest to handle. I would unpack the chests and use cloth wraps instead, smuggling them out bundle by bundle sandwiched between seasonal clothing. The head ornaments were small and numerous, so they had to be sorted first, gold with gold, jade with jade. The silver was cheap, so there was no rush for that. By the time I had gone over it in my mind for the 3rd time, the door behind me creaked open. I turned around. Madame Fang stood at the doorway. Qiuwu stood half a step behind her, clutching a key in her hand, the one for the outer room. Yaxin, Madame Fang stepped into the room, her gaze sweeping from me to the trunks behind me, then back to my face. Your father gave you the tally sticks, and I won't stand in your way. But if you're moving things out of the storehouse, there ought to be some proper procedure, shouldn't there? There is a plan. What plan? I didn't say a word. Lady Fang took 2 steps forward. Today, she had changed into an eaglewood-colored baize and wore only a single white jade hairpin in her hair. She looked more plain than usual, as if she had intentionally avoided wearing any jewelry that might clink or jingle. Qiuwu said your food box was packed with something when you left this morning, she said. It was full when you went out, but the box was empty when you returned. Qiuwu stood by the door, her eyelids drooping. It's a painting, I said. I'm taking it to Shen Temple to offer to the Buddha. Offer to the Buddha? Your father's boating on the Pine Stream, he hid it for 6 years, refusing to even let your grandmother see it before she passed, and you're giving it to a temple? Madame Fang stared at me. After a moment, she suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. The force wasn't great, but her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into my sleeve. Yaxin, she lowered her voice, speaking in little more than a breath, tell me the truth. Have you heard some kind of rumor? I looked at her. She was afraid. The composure on her face was a facade. The hand gripping my wrist was trembling slightly. She might not have believed it when Qiuwu told her about the food container, but the land deed had been moved, she must have discovered it. Madam, I withdrew my hand and pulled my sleeve back down, you found that the land deed wasn't where it belonged, didn't you? Lady Fang's breath hitched for a moment. Immediately after, she took a half step back, bumping into Qiuwu. Her eyes widened. How did you? I went through them before I left this morning, I said. I moved them to a more secure place. Madame Fong stood before me, her lips trembling several times, yet no words came out. It was only when Qiuwu supported her from behind that she managed to steady herself. Yaxin, she finally said, your father is straightforward. I've seen through his lofty pride and integrity in the 20 years since I married into this family. But you are different. Since you were a child, you have never spoken without being certain of your ground. I didn't respond. Mrs. Fong looked at me for a long time, then suddenly turned to glance at Qiuwu. Qiuwu nodded, stepped out, and closed the door to the outer room behind her. Only the two of us remained in the inner room. What exactly is happening in 3 days? Mrs. Fong's voice was low and tight, like a string stretched taut all day. Tell me. I won't spread it. There are over 50 people in the Shen household, you can't move everything on your own. I looked at her. The words surged up in my heart only to be pressed back down. I couldn't say the words house seizure. Saying them would be ironclad evidence, and if she didn't believe me, it would only ruin everything. But I could let her guess for herself. Madam, I said, pointing to the chest at the very back of the storehouse, you recognize all the jewelry in that box. There are about 20 pieces inside. Exchange whatever you can for silver within 3 days. For those you can't, wrap them up well and stitch them into the lining of your winter clothes. Stitch them into my winter clothes? But those are my own belongings. In 3 days, they might not be yours anymore. Madame Fong's face turned pale. She took a step back, her back pressing against the crate, as a faint, sharp intake of breath escaped her chest. The Jinyui? I did not answer. But as Madame Fong looked into my eyes, she swallowed the rest of her sentence. She raised her hand to cover her mouth, the color draining completely from her face. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Shen Zhao's voice drifted in from the outer room. Sister? Are you in the inner chamber? I just heard you sent that painting to the temple. Father is so furious he's smashing cups in his study. The door was pushed open a crack, and Shen Zhao poked his head in. Upon seeing that Lady Fong was also there, he shrunk back slightly, but squeezed inside nonetheless. Oh, the madam is here as well. Lady Fong did not acknowledge him. Shen Zhao's gaze swept across Lady Fong's face before shifting to mine. If there was one thing he excelled at, it was reading the room. Seeing both women pale, he immediately wiped the playful smirk off his face. Sister, he leaned in, lowering his voice, what on earth happened? You mentioned 3 before leaving this morning, and now Dongtang is sick right after you returned, and you've got the warehouse keys in your hand. Did you find something out? I looked at Shen Zhao. In my previous life, this half-brother of mine died while being escorted into exile. Rumor had it that he was caught stealing rations from the guards, who broke his legs and abandoned him on the roadside. He cherished his life and was a coward at heart, but it was precisely because of that fear of death that he was the easiest to sway. Brother Zhao, I called out to him, those things you've been saving up, the gold and silver, the banknotes, the valuable trinkets, find a place to move them sometime in the next couple of days. The smile completely vanished from Shen Zhao's face. Move them? He asked. Move them where? Outside. To someone you trust, or some inconspicuous spot outside the city. Just don't keep them stored in the manor. What's wrong with keeping them in the manor? I repeated the thought in my mind. In 3 days, these things will no longer belong to the Shen family. Shen Zhao heard it. Because his slick, smiling face froze in an instant. The corners of his mouth remained at their previous angle, but the light in his eyes went out as if someone had blown it out. The embroidered uniform guard? He wasn't asking me. He was seeking confirmation from Lady Fong. Lady Fong did not deny it. Shen Zhao closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, the look in his eyes had completely changed. He had spent 19 years idling away in the Shen family, never taking anything seriously, but at this moment he finally was. Sister, he took a step forward, you tell me what to do, and I'll handle it. Fong can move what she's able to, you deal with father, and I'll take care of whatever I can move. I'll handle the silks and the jewelry, Fong suddenly spoke up. She straightened up from beside the chest, the panic on her face subsiding slightly. Her voice was still trembling, but at least she could speak. My dowry manor is outside the city. We can unpack the silks and stuff them into grain sacks to transport them there. One cart should be enough to carry it all. I've already sent the calligraphy and paintings to the temple, I said. I'll handle the remaining sundries and the land deeds. Shen Zhao gave a nod. The miscellaneous items I have on hand, I'll pack them tonight and move them through the side gate first thing tomorrow morning. Mrs. Fong looked at him, where do you plan on sending them? Shen Zhao turned his head and glanced at me. I shook my head, signaling him not to say anything. He understood immediately. Sis, he said, you told me not to ask, so I won't. But you have to tell me, what happens after we finish moving? After we finish moving, I said, walking to the doorway and resting my hand on the frame, the whole family is leaving. Shen Zhao stood in the middle of the storehouse. Sunlight squeezed through the crack in the door, slicing a thin shadow across his face. He glanced at me, then at Lady Fong, before finally lowering his head and uttering a single word, fine. Lady Fong said nothing more and turned to walk out. Her pace was slightly quicker than when she had entered, her left hand gripping her sleeve tightly. Shen Zhao followed her to the door, then turned back to give me one last look. Sister, he said in a low voice, Dong Tang is burning up and drifting in and out of consciousness. I passed by the servants' quarters just now and heard her talking in her sleep. She called your name a couple of times. I'll go see her later. MHM. He stepped over the threshold, then paused. Oh, right, the gatekeeper mentioned that while you were at Cin Temple, someone was asking about your carriage. I looked at him. Who? I don't know him, Shen Zhao said. He was in plain clothes, but he had a standard-issue waist token hanging from his belt. The gatekeeper said he'd never seen the man before and didn't dare ask too many questions. He left. Standing at the entrance of the storehouse, I pulled the 3 title deeds from my sleeve and counted them once more. 1 for a shop in the north of the city, 1 for a residence in the south, and 1 for 20 acres of paddy fields outside the city walls. Someone had been asking about my carriage. A standard-issue waist token. Miss? Chiuwu's voice drifted over from beneath the corridor. I tucked the land deed back into my sleeve, locked the storehouse door, and turned past the veranda. Miss, Chiuwu stood at the entrance of the main courtyard, the madam said. To set aside that box of head ornaments tonight, and she asks that you come over to look through them together. Understood. As I stepped onto the veranda, the autumn wind was sweeping through the eaves. The hour was still early, and the sunlight was just right. The first thing to do tonight is not to light those headpieces. It is to pay a visit to my father's study. The secret compartment for the land deeds is empty. He must have discovered it by now. The study door was left ajar. I knocked twice, and a voice from within said, "Come in," its tone significantly lower than usual. Shen Jingting sat behind the desk. A book was spread open before him, but he hadn't turned a page in a long while. His fingertip pressed against the corner, leaving a sharp crease in the paper. The cup of tea on the table remained untouched, having long since gone cold. I walked in. He lifted his eyelids slightly, then lowered them again. Where are the keys? On me. The items in the warehouse, he paused. How much has been moved? The calligraphy and paintings were sent off today. The silks and jewelry will be packed tonight and taken out of the city first thing tomorrow morning. Shen Zhao closed the book. He pressed his hands against the desk, his knuckles turning slightly white, as if he had finally asked the question after holding it in for a long time. Did you take the land deeds? MHM. When did you find out the location of the hidden compartment in my desk? When I was little, you taught me how to read. I caught a glimpse of it once when you opened the hidden compartment to retrieve your seal. Shen Zhao remained silent for a while. The study was so quiet that the only sound was the occasional crackle of the lamp wick. He stood up and walked to the window with his back to me, the outline of his shoulders casting a long shadow in the candlelight. Yaxin, he said without turning around, that 3-day limit you mentioned today. Are there 2 days left? Half of this morning has already passed. There is a day and a half remaining. Moving an entire warehouse in a day and a half? He turned around to look at me. Do you really think that's possible? It has to be moved, whether we can finish or not. We'll take as much as we can. Anything that can't be taken, it's better off broken than left for others. Shen Zhao brows furrowed. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but swallowed his words and sat back down. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a key, and placed it on the desk. I never told the Fong family about this one. Behind the hidden compartment in the study, tucked inside the wall bricks, there are 2 more calligraphy scrolls. They were part of your grandmother's dowry and are even older than boating on a pine stream. If you're going to move things, take those along as well. I picked up the keys. Father. What? This Boshan censer in your study, it's bronze and too heavy. If I can't move it, I'll just leave it behind. Shen Zhao didn't respond. He nodded, then shook his head. Before I stepped out of the study, he asked from behind me, what about the things your mother left behind? I stopped in my tracks. The things my biological mother had left behind, a chest of old clothes, a few letters, and a silver hairpin she had worn on her wedding day. All of those items were in my room. I'll keep them myself. Shen Zhao said nothing more. I walked out, pulled the study door shut, and stood under the corridor to tuck the new key into my sleeve, placing it together with the 3 land deeds. Tonight, I would start by pawning that headpiece. Just as dusk fell, Chiu arrived at my courtyard carrying a lamp. Dongtang was still running a fever, so I told her to rest and began laying out the box of jewelry under the lamplight myself. Madame Fong sat opposite me, pen and booklet in hand, recording each item one by one. This golden phoenix hairpin is of excellent quality. Keep it to exchange for silver. This pair of jade bracelets, the clarity is mediocre. Wrap them up. Tuck them into your winter coat and take them with you. Fong stopped writing halfway through and suddenly set down her brush. Yaxin, does your father know? Understood. He didn't stop you? He gave me the key to the hidden compartment in his study. Mrs. Fong froze for a moment, then lowered her head to continue writing, her brush pausing briefly on the paper. This is the first time in his life he hasn't followed his own set of rules. Chiu brought in the tea and then withdrew. The courtyard was quiet. Shen Zhao's side was also packing tonight, and through the 2 courtyard walls, one could faintly hear his hushed voice directing Zhu Yan to move the crates. It took about an hour to finish checking the jewelry. Mrs. Fong closed the ledger and pushed it toward me. We leave for the manor first thing tomorrow morning. The silks and jewelry will be taken in 1 carriage. Chiu will come with me, and we'll tell outsiders we're going to have clothes tailored for the new season. MHM. Did you send that painting to Cin Temple? She asked suddenly. MHM. Mrs. Fong glanced at me and didn't press further. She stood up and walked to the door, then suddenly stopped, turned back, and whispered, I'm going to the manor tomorrow. You stay in the residence. And keep a tight lid on your father's mouth. I know. She left. I sat under the lamp and went through the box of jewelry again, wrapping what needed wrapping, sorting what needed sorting, and hiding what needed to be tucked into my clothes. By the time I finished, it was pitch black outside. When Qiuwu came to blow out the lamp, I didn't leave. I sat by the bed and pulled the 3 land deeds from my sleeve to look at them once more. A storefront in the north of the city, a residence in the south, and 20 acres of paddy fields outside the city walls. These 3 pieces of paper could buy a way out. After Qiuwu blew out the lamp and left, I sat in the darkness for a while. I began mentally rehearsing tomorrow's itinerary: leave the city before dawn, check the cellar at Shen Temple to ensure it can hold the remaining items. Take the official highway on the return trip to avoid the morning market crowds. By the time I return, Shen Zhao's goods should have been shipped out. In the afternoon, go to the study to retrieve those 2 calligraphy scrolls and paintings belonging to grandmother. All of this must be completed within the span of tomorrow. The entire day after tomorrow will be used for tying up loose ends. I went over these steps twice in the dark, and only after confirming there were no omissions did I lie down and close my eyes. I left the house before dawn the next day. The stone steps at the side gate of Shen Temple were still damp with night dew. This time, I didn't let the driver follow me inside. Instead, I circled around to the old wooden door in the backyard and slipped through. The entrance to the cellar was located in an empty room at the end of the west corridor. I lifted the cover and glanced down by the faint light filtering through the cracks in the window. It wasn't deep, about the height of a man and a half. The floor was covered with a layer of dry straw, and a few empty clay jars were stacked in the corner. It was enough. It could hide all the remaining small items. I closed the cover and pushed the floor tiles back into place. As I turned around, I heard someone behind me say, "You are up early, benefactor." I paused and turned around. Hui Ming was standing under the veranda. He still held a broom in his hand, having swept only half the ground. The morning light shone from behind him, leaving his aged face devoid of any discernible expression. "Master. Did you just go to the backyard, benefactor?" "Yes, looking for an empty room. I wanted to ask if I might borrow one for a few days to store some things." Hui Ming did not respond immediately. He swept the ground twice, gathering the fallen leaves into a pile before speaking. "The painting you offered last time has been safely put away. If you have other items to store, there is an empty room behind the side hall. It is quite inconspicuous." I looked at him. "Thank you, master." "You are most welcome. Please, feel free to do as you wish, benefactor." He didn't ask what I was leaving, nor how long I would leave it for. As I walked out of Shen Temple, I glanced toward the mountain gate. The pilgrims had not yet arrived, and the entire temple remained quiet and serene. The carriage followed the official road on the return journey. The sky was now fully bright, people had begun working on the ridges between the fields on both sides of the road, and the silhouette of the city walls grew clearer in the morning light. I leaned against the carriage wall, calculating the plans for the day after tomorrow. Madame Fang's manor was in the east of the city, and transporting the goods would take about half a day for a round trip. She left today and would return tomorrow, so the timing should be just right. Shen Zhao would arrange his own personal effects, so I didn't need to concern myself with them. As for the remaining miscellaneous items, the jade bracelets, jade pendants, and ivory fans, I could make one more delivery tomorrow afternoon. By the time I counted the 4th trip to pack the silver wine jugs in my head, the carriage suddenly slowed down. "Miss," the driver's voice drifted in through the curtain, "someone is riding toward us on the road ahead, blocking the way a bit." I lifted a sliver of the carriage curtain. A horse stood sideways across the official highway. The man atop it held the reins, his head turned toward the ridges of the roadside fields, his profile traced with a golden edge by the morning light. He wore indigo casual robes and a dark leather belt around his waist, the buckle devoid of any ornamentation. His official identification tag wasn't visible. However, the way he held the reins was not the gesture of a scholar. With palms facing inward and thumbs hooked over the leather, it was the grip of someone who had spent years wielding a blade. The coachman was just about to steer around him when the man suddenly turned his head. His gaze fell upon my hand as it lifted the curtain. "My apologies," he said, his voice neither high nor low, "I mistook you for someone else." I let the curtain fall. The carriage began to move again, bypassing the horse and heading toward the city gate. The wheels jolted as they rolled over the gravel road, and I gripped the window frame to steady myself. In the moment he turned his head just now, I caught a clear glimpse of the dark leather belt around his waist. There was a subtle pattern on the inside of the buckle, shaped like a cloud motif, with a small character engraved in the center, though I couldn't make out what it was. Standard issue leather belt, engraved cloud motif. The Jinui. I leaned against the carriage wall and closed my eyes for a moment. The mental tally I had just been running, the 4th shipment of silver wine pots, the need to clear the warehouse before the day after tomorrow, how much of it had he heard? Did he hear it, or not? The expression on that man's face had been too flat, revealing no clues whatsoever. After the carriage passed through the city gates, I lifted the curtain and glanced back. The horse on the official road was no longer where it had been. I let the curtain fall. "I'm not going back to the manor," I told the driver. "Go to the street with the storefronts in the north of the city." "Miss?" "Take the long way back." The driver didn't ask any questions and turned the carriage around. I leaned against the carriage wall, running my fingers over the land deed in my sleeve once more. The deed for the storefront in the north of the city was still there, untouched. The morning market on the street where my shop is located in the north of the city was quite crowded today. As the carriage slowly rounded the corner of the street, I lifted the curtain to glance at my own shop. The door panels were still up, and it hadn't opened for business yet, looking exceptionally desolate compared to the bustle of its neighbors. Having confirmed the shop was still there, I dropped the curtain, back to the manor. On the way back, I went over the day after tomorrow's arrangements once more. Tomorrow, Lady Fang's silks and jewelry would be moved out of the city. Shen Zhao's personal belongings would be finished by the morning, and I would personally deliver grandmother's 2 scrolls of calligraphy and painting in the afternoon. Early the morning after next, the remaining miscellaneous items in the warehouse would be loaded onto carts and sent to the temple, and I would return in the afternoon to wrap things up. The entire family must be evacuated before nightfall. The carriage stopped at the side gate. As I stepped down, the gatekeeper's servant hurried forward. "Miss, someone came by just now." "Who was it?" "I don't know. He was in plain clothes, stood at the gate for a while, asked has Miss Shen left the manor? And then walked away." I turned around and scanned the alley outside the manor gates. It was empty. What did he look like? He was quite tall and looked young. He didn't come inside, but just stood at the bottom of the stone steps and asked a question. When I told him you had left the city early this morning, he simply nodded and turned to leave. He didn't leave a name? No. I walked through the side gate and closed it behind me. That man had blocked the official road on horseback and then came to the front of the manor to ask a question. He knew I had left the city. He knew I had gone out early this morning. He asked, has she left the manor? Rather than is Miss Shen in? I stood under the veranda for a while. The autumn sunlight filtered through the eaves onto the floor tiles, with tiny specks of dust swirling within the beams of light. From Shen Zhao's courtyard in the distance came the sound of crates being moved, and Zhuyan's hushed voice calling out, "Easy now." Everything was still proceeding according to plan. But a new variable had emerged. Madame Fang is transporting goods out of the city today. Shen Zhao is packing his belongings today. And I am going to the study this afternoon to collect the calligraphy and paintings. Time is running out. That embroidered uniform guard on horseback, regardless of how much he overheard, did not stop me today. He simply rode away. In that moment, a thought suddenly struck me. If he had heard the words Xian Temple, he would have brought men to seal off the temple today. He didn't. Therefore, he likely didn't hear much. Either he heard nothing at all, or he only caught a vague sense of it, insufficient to make a judgment. I headed toward the study. In the alley outside the courtyard gate, the sound of the horse's hoofs had already faded away. The sunlight was just right, and a breeze blew in from the north, causing the withered grass atop the wall to lean for a brief moment. As I rounded the corner of the veranda, I came face to face with Shen Zhao standing under the eaves. He had his hands behind his back, gazing at the old locust tree in the courtyard. Seeing me approach, he simply asked, "You're back?" "MHM. Your mother's silver hairpin," he said, "remember to bring that along too." I paused for a moment. "Father? Someone came to the manor looking for you just now." He turned his head to look at me. They were in plain clothes, a face I didn't recognize. "What did he say?" Shen Zhao paused. I watched the expression on his face shift for a fleeting second, from calm to a slight twitch of his brow, as if he had recalled something he shouldn't have. "It was nothing." Shen Zhao withdrew his gaze. He just asked one last question before leaving. He asked if there was a maid named Dongtang in my manor. My fingers curled slightly. What did he say? He just asked that one question out of the blue, Shen Zhao said. I told him yes. He nodded, said that's good, and then turned and left. The next day, the entire manor felt like a pot of boiling water with the lid clamped tight. Fang's silks and jewelry were transported out of the city before noon, with Zhiwu accompanying the carriage. By evening, word returned that they had arrived at the estate. Shen Zhao's valuables were split into 3 trips, and Zhu Yan wore through a layer of her shoe soles running back and forth. By dusk, the final bundle had been sent out through the side gate. I went to the study to retrieve my grandmother's 2 scrolls of calligraphy and painting, wrapped them in old clothes, and took them to Xian Temple. Hui Ming asked no questions, taking them and locking them directly into a cabinet in the side hall. By nightfall, the storehouse was more than half empty. What remained were nothing more than immovable screens, tables, chairs, bronze and ironware, and a few camphorwood chests filled with old books. I stood at the warehouse entrance, taking one last look around before sliding the tally off the key ring and placing it on the shelf beside the doorframe. I've had enough. Whatever is left can be thrown away for all I care. But I never expected that Shen Zhao would go back on his word on the very last night. Just after the hour of the rat, Zhiwu returned from the manor to report. Having heard her words, Lady Fang nodded, then turned to me and said, "Things are settled at the manor. I'll head over there one more time before dawn to hide those last few bundles in the cellar." Yes? After Madame Fang left, I went to the study to confirm the departure time for tomorrow with Shen Zhao. When I pushed the door open, he was standing behind the desk, clutching that official seal in his hand. The candlelight flickered against his face, leaving it a ghostly, ashen pale. "Father?" "Yaxin," he didn't look up, his voice so raspy it was barely audible, "I cannot leave." I walked in and closed the door behind me. "Father. I am a commissioned official of the Imperial Court." His knuckles turned white as he gripped his official seal. "The seizure of our estate is the Emperor's will. If I flee, it is defiance of a decree. It is a flight from justice. The Shen family of Jingting has maintained a stainless reputation for 3 generations. Father, if you are dead, what use is a stainless reputation?" Shen Zhao looked up at me abruptly. His lips trembled, as if he were choked up by some unspoken words. "Yaxin, you're just a young girl. You don't understand these things. I have lived for 45 years and spent my entire life studying the books of the sages. You've spent your whole life studying the books of the sages, but if you die on the road to exile, will there be anyone to bury your body?" Shen Zhao expression changed. His hand gripping the official seal trembled, the square stamp tilting between his fingers and nearly slipping from his grasp. "Do you know what exile really means?" I said. A group of 200 people given only one bowl of thin porridge a day. If you fall ill halfway there, no one cares. You lie by the roadside with a high fever, and the escorting officers, annoyed that you're in the way, kick you into a ditch. By the time your companions come back to look for you, Yaxin. Shen Jingting's voice exploded in the study. He leaned forward half a step, bracing his hands against the desk, his chest heaving violently and his eyes bloodshot. What did you say? I didn't back down. I said you died halfway there. No one to collect your body. I waited in Lingnan for 3 years, and what I got was a travel permit with your name on it, deceased. Shen Jingting's face had turned completely pale. His mouth hung open, his breathing grew increasingly shallow, and his hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the table. It was as if his bones had been removed, and he slowly slumped back into his chair. The study remained silent for a long time. The wick crackled once, and a spark splashed onto the edge of the lampstand before dying out. Shen Jingting raised his head to look at me. There was a glint of moisture in his eyes, but the tears did not fall. That dream you had, it wasn't just a dream, was it? I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no. Father, I said, crouching down before him and looking into his eyes. Tomorrow morning, when the embroidered uniform guard bursts in, will you be sitting here letting that official robe of yours shatter along with you, or will you stand up and come with me? Shen Jingting looked into my eyes for a long time. A low, muffled sound escaped his throat, as if he were swallowing something scalding hot. Then, he set the official seal back onto the table. Let's go. He stumbled as he stood up, steadying himself only after bracing his hand against the corner of the table. Has Shen Yi's clothing been packed? Madame Fong finished tidying it this afternoon. Your mother's silver hairpin. I have it on me. Shen Jingting took a deep breath and exhaled. He turned around, retrieved a palm-sized wooden box from a hidden compartment in the desk, and handed it over. This. Take it. I took the wooden box and pried it open just a crack. Inside was a stack of banknotes. The denominations weren't large, but the stack was thick. What I've saved over the years, Shen Jingting said, I never told Lady Fong. I closed the wooden box and tucked it into my sleeve, placing it together with those 3 land deeds. Leaving in 2 hours. The alley behind the side gate. Shen Jingting nodded, then shook his head, ultimately saying nothing. I turned to walk out. As I pushed open the study door, a gust of cold wind rushed in, causing the candle flame on the desk to flicker 3 times. When I walked through the front courtyard to call for Shen Yi, I heard the back door sound. A very light knocking, 3 times, a pause, then 3 times again. No one should be coming to the door at this hour. I came to a halt and reached into my sleeve, touching the sharp tip of the silver hairpin. There were 3 more knocks at the back door. I walked over and stole a glance through the crack in the door. Standing outside was a man dressed in indigo civilian clothes. He had no attendants, no horse, and was carrying nothing in his hands. The moonlight shone from behind him, making his eyes appear exceptionally clear in the night. Xie Yan. I slid back the latch and opened the door just a crack. Miss Shen, he said, his voice very soft, everything you were thinking, I heard it all. I looked at him. From that single glance on the official road yesterday, to the words you just spoke to your father in the study, Xie Yan's gaze fell upon my face. I didn't miss a single word. I said nothing. Don't be afraid, he said. I only have one question for you. Xie Yan pulled something from his sleeve and handed it over. Under the moonlight, I saw it clearly. It was a bronze token engraved with the words North City, with a cloud pattern etched below. Take this. Leave through the North City gate tomorrow. The guards change shifts between the end of the hour of the tiger and the beginning of the hour of the rabbit. They won't check this token. I didn't take it. Why are you helping me? Xie nudged the token further toward me. Of all the things you were thinking just now, I only heard one meaning: you don't want the Shen family to die. That is enough. I took the token. The copper surface still carried the warmth of his palm. I looked at him, aren't you afraid that if I run away, you won't be able to account for it? Xie suddenly smiled. It was a very slight curve, almost invisible in the moonlit night. Miss Shen, he said, I can only fulfill my duty once you have taken your entire family and left after daybreak tomorrow. After saying this, he took half a step back. Leave through the north gate. Between the end of the hour of the tiger and the beginning of the hour of the rabbit, he repeated. Remember that. Then he turned and walked into the night. His indigo-clad back vanished into the shadows at the mouth of the alley, his footsteps so light they made no sound, like a cat landing on the ground. I looked down at the bronze medallion in my hand and flipped it over. The character 4 yen was engraved on the back. I gripped the token tightly and reached back to shut the rear door. Shen Yi was still half asleep when Lady Fong scooped him out of bed. Rubbing his eyes, he asked, Mother, where are we going? Lady Fong didn't answer him. She wrapped him in a thick cloak and led him toward the side gate. Shen Zhao had already arrived, with Zhu Yan standing behind him carrying 2 bundles. Qiu Wu was there as well, holding an unlit lantern in his hand. Xin Jingting was the last to come out. He had changed into a suit of gray cloth clothes. His official uniform was left behind, folded neatly on the study desk. Is everyone here? Mrs. Fong's voice was kept extremely low. I nodded. The copper token gripped in my palm had grown warm from the friction. I glanced toward the entrance of the alley. It was deserted, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the withered leaves. Let's go, I said. Shen Zhao pulled open the side gate and peeked out, then turned back and signaled, all clear. Madame Fong led Shen Yi out the door first. Qiu Wu followed behind her, with Zhu Yan second. Xin Jingting stopped for a moment at the threshold, looking back one last time at the pitch-black estate. Father, I said from behind him, it's time to go. He withdrew his gaze and stepped over the threshold. I was the last to step out, pulling the corner gate shut behind me. The final sliver of candlelight peeking through the crack of the door was extinguished. The North City Gate opened its first crack during the final hour of the tiger. As the city guards were changing shifts, I flashed the bronze token. The guard glanced at it, asked no questions, and waved us through. After traveling about 2 li past the north gate, we found 2 green-clothed mule carts prepared in advance by the Fong estate waiting by the roadside. Shen Zhao helped Shen Jingting into the first carriage, while Lady Fong pulled Shen Yi into the second. Sis, Shen Zhao poked his head out, aren't you getting in? I looked back at the city walls behind me. The darkness of the night was receding, and a sliver of pale, crabshell blue was breaking across the eastern horizon. I'm waiting for someone. Waiting for who? I didn't answer. Shen Zhao glanced at me and withdrew behind the carriage curtain. The wind blew in from the north, and a layer of thin mist floated over the fields on both sides of the official road. It was quiet in the direction of the distant city gate. The gong hadn't sounded yet. There was still time. Standing beside the blue-clothed mule carriage, I pulled the silver hairpin from my sleeve again and gripped it in my hand. It was my mother's hairpin, cool to the touch, without any ornamentation, and the end meant for pinning hair was slightly blunt. The faint line of crabshell cyan along the horizon was slowly widening. I tucked the hairpin back into my sleeve, stepped onto the carriage shaft, and lifted the curtain to sit inside. Let's go, I said to the driver. Head south. As the mule carriage began to move, the sound of a gong suddenly drifted from the direction of the city gates behind us. It was distant, like something sinking to the bottom of water, dispersing after a single low hum. Shen Zhao leaned out from the lead cart and glanced back. I heard his voice torn into fragments by the wind, drifting over in snatches. Sis. It rang. They're here. In the second mule cart, Shen Yi asked Lady Feng, "Mother, what rang?" Lady Feng did not answer him. I lifted the carriage curtain and looked back. The silhouette of the city walls grew smaller in the morning light, and the distant gate looked like a closed eye. Shen Jingting remained silent in the first mule carriage throughout. A quarter of an hour had passed since the gong sounded, and the official road heading south was quiet. The sky was mostly bright now. Dew by the roadside reflected the light, and the grass on the field ridges was bathed in a faint layer of golden sunlight. Through the gap in the curtain, I saw a line of dust rising in the distance. It was the sound of hooves. A single horse. Coming from the north. The coachman pulled the reins, and the carriage slowed down. The horse drew closer and closer. The rider, dressed in indigo casual robes, galloped up to the side of the mule carriage to ride alongside it, pulling the reins to reduce speed. Xie Yan. He turned his head and glanced toward the carriage curtain. I lifted a corner, creating a small gap. His eyes met mine, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "Miss Shen," he said, "you are taking the Shen family away. You must leave something behind for me to report back with." I looked at him through the carriage curtain. The words surged up in my heart, then subsided. This time, the voice in my mind remained silent. "You've taken the Shen family away. You have to leave something behind for me to account for." Xie Yan sat astride his horse, the carriage curtain still lifted. Sunlight poured in from behind him, clearly illuminating the dust on his shoulders. His indigo casual robes were coated in a layer of dirt, as if he had been traveling all through the night. I pulled the curtain back completely and looked at him. "What account do you have to give?" "Seizing the estate," he said, his voice as flat as if he were remarking on the fine weather. "Shen Jingting embezzled military funds and colluded with frontier generals. His family assets are to be confiscated. 237 souls, and not a single one has escaped." "But my father didn't embezzle the military funds." "I know," Xie Yan said, pulling the reins to bring his horse a bit closer. "But if I say he embezzled them, then he embezzled them." I looked at him. In the sunlight, his face was clean and composed, without even a bead of sweat. "Aren't you afraid my father will overturn the case in the future?" What Shen Jingting has feared most his entire life is being tainted by criminal charges. Xie Yan glanced in the direction of the first mule carriage. Running away was already the greatest act of defiance in his life. He won't go back. A gust of wind blew across the ridges of the fields, causing the carriage curtain to flutter. There was no movement from the first mule carriage. Shen Jingting must have heard, but he remained silent. Xie Yan waited for a moment, and seeing that I remained quiet, he unfastened a leather pouch from his horse and handed it over. "Take it." I took it from him and weighed it in my hand. It was quite heavy. "What's inside?" "The painting boating on a piney stream from the storehouse," he said. "Hui Ming mentioned you forgot to pick it up." I paused for a moment. "You went to Xian Temple?" "I went there last night when your father changed his mind," Xie Yan said. "I took 2 extra calligraphies and paintings and tucked them in. Since everything was going to be confiscated anyway, no one would notice if there were a couple more or less." I didn't respond to that. He was helping the Shen family. Last night he gave me the copper medallion, this morning he created the illusion of the Shen family fleeing to avoid punishment, and he even went to Xian Temple to retrieve the artworks. When someone helps to this extent, there is always a reason. "Thousand-man Commander Xie," I said, "why are you helping the Shen family?" Xie Yan glanced at me. He suddenly dismounted, hitched the reins to the carriage shaft, and took a step forward. "Miss Shen," he said, his voice lowered significantly, "I did indeed hear the thoughts you had just now. You said in your heart that Shen Jingting died on the road to exile, Shen Zhao died during transport, and Dongtang died in Lingnan. I heard all of it." He looked at me. The things you mentioned in your heart, I don't know if you saw them in a dream or how you came to know them. But you don't want them to happen, do you? I didn't respond. A horse's hoof struck the ground and the mule carriage swayed slightly. I intercepted them for you, he said. I went to check the cellar at Shen Temple last night. The painting in the side hall is still there. Hui Ming said nothing. When you went to move the items, he could have reported it to the authorities, but he didn't. When you left the city today, the gate guards could have inspected you, but they didn't. You haven't made it this far because your own calculations were precise. He paused for a moment. It's because someone took the blow for you. I gripped the drawstring of the leather pouch and swallowed the words "thank you." And what about you? I asked. You let the primary culprit of the raid escape. How will you account for that when you return? Xie Yin brushed the dust off his sleeve, as if flicking away something utterly insignificant. The guard rotation records for the north gate will be erased tonight. I've had my men seal off the side gate. When the embroidered uniform guards stormed the Shen estate this morning, there were only a few elderly servants left. The treasury was empty, but the land deeds and official seal were still on the desk. The official seal was on the desk? I placed your father's seal back in the study, Xie Yin said. Shen Jingting fled in fear of his crimes, his family fortune is squandered, and the seal remains as evidence. With the seal there, the charges are solidified. The man is gone, but the case is closed. I looked at him. He had secured every possible escape route for the Shen family. How are you going to explain yourself? Xie Yin did not respond. He turned back to his horse, vaulted into the saddle, and pulled the reins to turn the horse around. There is a relay station 30 miles outside the North City Gate, he said. Head south before the hour of Shen. 5 miles west of the station is a stretch of wilderness. Once you cross that land, you will be in the neighboring province. Once across the border, the reach of the embroidered uniform guard will not be able to touch you. He looked down at me, the sunlight reflecting off the sweat at his temples into a thin line of brilliance. Miss Shen, he paused for a moment, until we meet again. He flicked the reins, and the horse stepped forward, heading north. His indigo-clad back grew distant on the official road, the sound of hooves gradually dissipating in the morning breeze. I lowered the carriage curtain and placed the leather pouch on my lap. Go, I said to the driver, head south. The mule carriage set off once more. Both sides of the southbound road were lined with vast stretches of farmland. The autumn rice was nearly ripe, a golden expanse bowing under the weight of the wind. Shen Zhao lifted the curtain, poked his head out, and took a look. Is that man gone? He's gone. What's his background? Shen Zhao pulled his head back and asked through the carriage wall, the Jinui clearing the way for us. I've never heard of such a thing. He overheard some things. What did you hear? I heard that I shouldn't let the Shen family die. Shen Zhao fell silent for a moment. Through the carriage wall, he suddenly said softly, then he must have heard other things as well. I did not answer. From Lady Fang's side came the sound of Shen Yi asking, Mother, where are we going now? Mrs. Fang said, we're going to your eldest aunt's house. Is it far to Auntie's house? Not far, we'll be there in 2 days' walk. Are we coming back then? Mrs. Fang paused. Her voice drifted through the blue cloth carriage curtain, slightly scattered by the wind. We aren't coming back. Shen Yi didn't ask any further. The 2 mule-drawn carriages traveled along the official road, one behind the other, their axles occasionally emitting a faint creak. The dew on the field ridges had been dried by the sun, and the wind carried the scent of dry rice leaves. The first carriage remained quiet throughout. Shen Jingting sat inside, not having uttered a single word since they left the city. About half an hour later, the carriages passed a tea shed. A thatched shack stood by the roadside with a few crooked benches, and hot water steamed on the stove. There were no customers in the shed, only an old woman wrapped in a headscarf dozing behind the stove. I told the driver to stop the carriage. I jumped down, walked to the first mule cart, and lifted the curtain. Shen Zhao sat inside, his hands clasped over his knees. Spread out before him was the item he hadn't left behind. What he had taken from the study wasn't his official seal, but something else entirely. Father, get out and stand for a while. There is still a long road ahead. Shen Zhao looked up at me. The dark circles under his eyes were heavy, as if he hadn't slept all night. He nodded, rose from the cart, and sat down on a bench at the roadside tea stall. Mrs. Fong got down from the carriage behind them and pulled Shen over to sit down, ordering 2 bowls of hot tea. Qiuwu went to the stove to help the old woman add firewood, while Zhu Yan crouched by the roadside to rest. Shen Zhao came over to sit beside me and handed me half a piece of dry flatbread. Sis, he said indistinctly, taking a bite of the bread, with all that stuff of ours, do we have enough silver to get by? Enough. How long will it last? If you spend sparingly, 2 or 3 years won't be a problem. The 20 acres of paddy fields outside the city can be rented out for income, and the storefront in the north of the city can also make money once it's revitalized. The jewelry and valuables you have on hand are enough for you to take a wife. Shen Zhao choked slightly on the pancake and coughed twice. Sister, you've even calculated that far ahead? I didn't respond, but pulled the half-piece of jade pendant from my sleeve and placed it on the tea stall table. The broken edge faced upward, and as the morning light fell upon the jagged surface, it seemed as though the rough edges had been somewhat smoothed away. Shen Zhao looked at the jade pendant, then looked back at me. What is this? Something that was broken a long time ago, I said. I remembered it just now and planned to have a new set made. The old woman at the tea stall brought over 2 bowls of hot tea. The rim of the coarse ceramic bowl had a small chip, and the rising steam carried the bitter fragrance of old tea leaves. I picked it up and took a sip. It was scalding, warming me all the way from my throat down to my stomach. Shen Zhao also picked it up and took a sip, grimacing from the heat. Beside the first mule cart, Shen Zhao sat alone. He held his bowl of tea without drinking, staring down at the tea stalks floating in the water, lost in thought. Mrs. Fong was leading Shen to eat dry biscuits on the other side of the tea shed, while Qiuwu broke the remaining biscuits into pieces and soaked them in tea to feed Shen. Occasionally, an ox cart or 2 would pass by on the official road. The old drivers would tilt their heads to glance at the group before turning back to continue on their way. The sun rose higher and higher, and the shadows grew shorter and shorter. I finished the bowl of tea and set it back on the table. Time to go, before the sun reaches its zenith. Shen Zhao stood up, brushed the dust off his hem, and turned to help Shen Zhao. Shen Zhao stumbled as he was helped up, steadying himself by leaning a hand against the corner of the table. Once he found his footing, he looked back at the road they had come from. The end of the official highway was empty, with nothing in sight. Father, I said behind him, it's time to go. He turned around and gave a nod. It was a very slight nod, as if he had just set down something incredibly heavy. The 2 mule carts set off once again. I climbed into the second cart, where Lady Fong and Shen were already waiting. Shen leaned against Lady Fong's chest and let out another yawn, his eyelids drooping halfway shut. Mom, wake me up when we get there. Go to sleep. I lowered the carriage curtain and leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment. The mule carriage swayed rhythmically as it headed south, the axle creaking steadily like someone counting aloud. The wind seeped through the gaps in the curtain, carrying the scent of hay and dust. At that hour, the embroidered uniform guard should have already surrounded the Shen estate. The warehouse doors would be open, and the official seal left on the table. Xie Yan would be standing in the empty main hall, telling his superior, they've escaped. Dong Tang was not in the manor. Qiuwu was not in the manor. Zhu Yan was not in the manor. Lady Fong was in the carriage. Shen Yi was asleep. Shen Zhao was in the carriage ahead. Shen Jingting sat in silence. I pulled the bronze token from my sleeve and flipped it over. The character 4 yen was clearly illuminated by the sunlight. After rubbing it twice, I tucked it back into my sleeve, placing it alongside my mother's silver hairpin. The mule carriage jolted as it rolled over a protruding stone on the official road. Shen Yi muttered something, turned over, and fell back asleep. I lifted the carriage curtain and glanced back. The road to the north grew narrower and more distant. The city walls vanished from sight, and the gates were no longer visible. There was only a long, deserted official highway, shimmering with a grayish-white light under the autumn sun. I let the curtain fall back down. Move forward. The story ends here. Thank you all for your company, and see you in the next one.